Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Funky Brain Podcast. Once again, my name is Dennis, and we're going to have some fun today. I have a very accomplished guest with us here today with a career spanning 6 decades. A veteran journalist, news anchor, author, member of the New York State Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and the recipient of 7 prestigious Emmy Awards for journalistic achievement, which you can see behind him, Mr. Marvin Scott. How are you doing today, sir?
Hi, Dennis. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, 60 years. I started in the business when I was 5 years old. No, it doesn't feel like 60. And I'm proud to say I'm still going strong because I still love every single day I work. Every day is a new experience. It's an education. And good to join you today. And hello to all of your podcast viewers.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's really great. I know, and I remember if you're going when you said 60 years, it doesn't feel like 60 years. It goes by like that. And I to quote Mr. George Costanza, he said, "Life's like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes."
Well, I'm still enjoying it. Every day is a new experience, and I get energized every time I do another story. There's no 2 days were ever alike.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly true. So since you started at such a young age and you've been doing this for 60 years, was there like, when you were like 5 years old, like you said, were you like, I want to be a newscaster? Or was there something that happened, or were you inspired by a person, a place, a thing, or an event, or what happened to get you there?
Give you the answer. It was a fire that ignited a career, literally, at the age of 14. I grew up in the Bronx, and I was a photography buff. That was my hobby. And one night, doing my homework, I heard fire engines racing by. I looked out the window, and night had turned to day. There was this huge fire just down the block from where I lived. And I dashed out with my camera, raced to the scene, took a couple of shots of flames belching from about a dozen windows of this catering hall. And matter of fact, I had one shot. The firefighters hadn't even set up their hoses, and it was a kind of a limp hose going into the building. And the New York Daily News was New York's picture newspaper, and they encouraged you have a picture? Give us a call. I gave them a call, said, I have this great shot. They said, okay, kid, bring it down. So I got on the subway, went down to the Daily News. They gave me immediately a $2 messenger fee. And the next day, I was standing with my brother at the newsstand waiting for the Bulldog edition to come out, 7:30 p.m. And I have to tell you, it was probably one of the biggest highs of my life. I opened the newspaper, and there on the centerfold was a quarter of the centerfold for my photograph of this fire with a credit line, photo by, and a story on page 4, student finds PIX pay. That was something in itself, getting exposed to that whole newspaper environment. But when I went back to my apartment building, block away, all my neighbors were standing on the corner asking me, what happened? What happened? I was there. So here I was standing on the corner in the Bronx, telling my neighbors just what I knew, what I had seen at the fire, what I knew at that moment. So you could say at the age of 14, that was my very first newscast. And but another sidebar to this thing, the very place where I went and received my $2 messenger fee, the building, the New York Daily News building, that's the building where Superman flew up. Years later, I came back, and I've been there for the past 40 years as an anchor reporter, the same building. Interesting. So it was that what inspired me. I got a rush from being there where it was happening, and my photography continued where I did a lot of stuff, and I sold to local magazines and newspapers anytime I had an opportunity. And in school, I majored in communications, was on the newspaper, began with my photography. Then I started dabbling in the writing. And my initial goal was to be a photographer for Life magazine. But as I was writing and as it evolved, Dennis, I wanted to get into communications in some form. In my senior year at NYU, I became campus correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune. And there was a milestone there. I became the youngest reporter ever to get a byline in the New York Herald Tribune. And that was wonderful. And my first job was fresh out of school in Charleston, West Virginia, WHTN-TV, chief cook and bottle washer. It was wonderful. I was hired in Charleston for the grand total of $70 a week. Back then, I guess 1960, that was not bad. And I got a chance to do everything. I shot my own stuff. I remember going to interview the governor, Governor Cecil Underwood. I would shoot my own stuff, and I would set the camera up, and I'd put a roll of film in. It was good for 3 minutes. I'd say, okay, Governor, you ready? Yeah, ready. I'd set the camera, roll, jump into the seat. I'd ask the governor questions for 3 minutes. Then I had to go back to the studio, and I had to process the stuff into the developer, into the stop, into the hypo, then hang it out to dry. I put it on a drum of dowel sticks and a fan. Then I had to edit it. Couldn't ask for better training. Those were the days, the vintage days of dealing with film before we progressed into video. I've watched kind of a metamorphosis of the whole industry, how it has changed technically. It has gone from a few channels and 3 network newscasts to 800 channels now. You get any flavor you want on the air. It's incredible.
Yeah, so now that things have definitely changed. So for somebody who is, 14 with their camera and just wanting to get going, or 16 years old now, like, what advice can you give to them, that aspiring journalist, author, photographer, newscaster? What would you tell them?
I advise, and I was telling you about the small market in Nebraska, Scotts Bluff, Nebraska. It was the 198th market out of 201 markets in the country. That's where you start. You get your opportunity. You work at a small station, as I did in Charleston, West Virginia. You get to do everything. You're not held to the union restrictions. You get your feet wet. Look for a cable news station. I have advised a couple of friends to do just that, and they have moved up. There's one friend, Clayton, who wanted to do sports, and he went to a station out somewhere out in the Midwest, and he spent about a year and a half there. Then he moved from market 156 to market 156 to market 84, and he's now looking to move to another market. That's how it evolves. There are opportunities in New York City. There are a number of reporters, anchors on the regular TV stations, on network operated stations, who came out of cable operations. New York 1 and News 12, Long Island. So it's an opportunity. That's where your best opportunity is today. And you have to let them know you're there. You can't be meager. I mean, I'll just share this story with you. When I started out, I was trying to get a job at a radio station in New York City. Of course, I had no experience. But when I got my jobs in West Virginia, in Columbus, Ohio, Grand Rapids, I would look for opportunities. When there was a major story, I would call that radio station in New York and say, "Hi, Marvin Scott here. Would you like a report on this disaster?" I did that with a mine disaster in West Virginia. I called WNEW radio. And then when I came back to visit my family in the city, I would always make it a point of going over to that station and seeing Lee Hanna, who was the news director. And as it progressed over the years, Lee Hanna remembered me. I got my first job back in New York because he recommended me to UPI Television News, where I came back to New York as night assignment manager, working along with someone named Reese Schoenfeld and Burt Reinhardt. Reese Schoenfeld was the person who suggested to Ted Turner CNN. Reese became the president, initial president. When I had an opportunity, when I left one station, they called me to join CNN back in 1980. And then Burt Reinhardt subsequently became president of CNN. So, something, it's a revolving door. You got to be nice to the people while you're low, while you're coming up, so they don't forget you. And I guess my advice is, don't let them forget you. If you believe enough in yourself and what you're capable of doing, pursue that dream and keep after the people. Let them know you're out there. Come up with ideas. I mean, I did one of the things, there was a program on NBC radio called NBC Monitor. And when I was in I was working in Grand Rapids, I became a regular contributor to NBC Monitor. I mean, there were things I remember, Adlai Stevenson had a thing at the UN, and something he said to Khrushchev, "I will stay here until hell freezes over." Well, I saw a great story there. So I went to hell. It was frozen over. There was a place actually called Hell, Michigan. And I sat beside a waterfall interviewing someone, a frozen waterfall. The story about hell frozen over. It was a great little story. Bed pushers up somewhere in Lansing, Michigan. So that's my guidance to people. Think out of the box and don't let people forget you and follow that dream.
Awesome advice. I mean, stay in front of people. Like nobody's going to come to you while you're sitting on the couch playing Xbox,
No.
not letting people know you exist and knock on the door and be like, hey, you want this job? You want to get out there and do some stuff? You have to get out there and get in front of people, however possible. And now there's so many different, look at what it says above my head, the impossible. It's like, get out there.
Possible.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to reach people now. I mean, look at us. We're 2,000 miles apart from each other. And we're able to have a great talk here today. I'm sure you get this one all the time, but what was your favorite interview?
No question about it. It would have to be with Martin Luther King. That was an awesome moment. I did not realize back then what he would become and this symbol of the whole Black civil rights movement. But it was back in 1966. I was returning from an assignment at the Space Center when James Meredith, he broke down the color barrier at the University of Mississippi. He had launched a march through Mississippi called the March Against Fear. He was gunned down on the first day of the march. He did survive. But the big guns in the civil rights movement said, we're not going to let this march stop. They all came down to Memphis and gathered to visit him in the hospital. And they continued the march against fear down to Jackson, Mississippi. Leading the group, Dr. Martin Luther King, also James Farmer, Floyd McKissick, and the head of the radical movement, Stokely Carmichael. So they all joined. Here are the big guns of the civil rights movement. And here was this kid, the first time damn Yankee in the Deep South. I was forewarned to be careful down there. And I met King. My impression that King was a very tall man. In height, he was, I think, just under 5'6". But in stature, I have to tell you, he was so impressive. Just the way he dealt with people, the way he talked to people, he was an orator, as evidenced by his I Have a Dream speech. But I listened to that firsthand. Every night when they would bed down, they would have a little rally before, and every one of the leaders would have an opportunity to speak. And James Farmer, I got to know Farmer. He was so eloquent and a great voice for the civil rights movement. And then Dr. King would get up, and he was a voice of moderation. Then Stokely Carmichael would get up. He was the firebrand. He would say, we need more black sheriffs, more black mayors. We need black power. That was the beginning of the Black Power movement. And if I were ever to do a book on this, I would entitle it Turning Points, the turning point, because it was a turning point. And when I watched Dr. King, every time he'd walk along the highway, it was very hot, it was June, and he would wave out the cotton fields and say, come on, children, come on, children. And slowly you'd see from the distance, these cotton farmers, they'd be walking out, and every time everyone joined that march, it was another victory for the civil rights movement. I had a moment to sit with Dr. King. We had taken a break in the march. I had gone across the road to a motel to file my radio report, walked across the road. There was Dr. King sitting on a mound alongside the road. Dr. King, may I join you? Oh, yeah, sit down. And we chatted for less than 10 minutes. And I guess during the conversation, he was echoing the sentiments he had expressed at the Washington March a couple of years earlier of the I Have a Dream, the iconic I Have a Dream speech. And at one point I asked him, he had so many threats on his life. I said, Dr. King, you have a family. Why do you do this? Why do you put yourself out like this? There was a pregnant pause. He looked me in the eye and he said, for the children, for the children. And so many decades later, it's the children who have really benefited by all the toils of his efforts in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. It was most impressive watching him and the way he would talk to the protesters and the rednecks along the road. It was an eye-opening experience for me, seeing the way things were. There was an incident where I couldn't file reports because the payphones along the way, the telephone booths, the connection was cut from the phone. And I later found out it was the action of the Ku Klux Klan trying to defer us from filing any reports. But there were so many moments in that march. There was a man whose name I remember, Armstead Phipps, 50-year-old sharecropper, who, against his family's wishes, joined the march. He just had to do it. He had a heart condition, and he was out on the march maybe 2 days, and he collapsed. He dropped dead of a heart attack. And I remember they lifted his body and put it under an oak tree in the shade. And Dr. King, James Farmer, everyone else gathered over his body and recited the 23rd Psalm. It was such an emotional moment that I remember it so vividly to this day. Here was a man who was not known by anyone, but he spoke out with his life for the civil rights movement. So that's a long response to say who was the most incredible person I ever interviewed, and I say Dr. King, but there were so many others. God, I could give you a long list, Dennis. We could go on for hours, and I can give you a profile of these people. Sophia Loren, Jerry Lewis, Yasser Arafat, Golda Meir, Presidents Ford, and the list can go on and on. I figure I've done, in the course of my 60-year career, I have calculated maybe 30,000 interviews. It's not doing one-on-one. When you figure as a reporter, I'm out in the street each day working a story, maybe I'm doing 3-4 interviews, plus my weekly public affairs show, News Close-Up, I maybe have 3 guests. So add all that up over a period of years, 30,000. And I figure about 15,000 stories, and still going, still counting.
It was really inspiring. I love that. And, to piggyback on something you said earlier about choose what it is that you want to do and then go after it with everything you got. And along those lines, a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to get out of high school and I'm going to go here. There's that straight line. And that's not the way it goes. You get out of school and you're like, I'm going to go here. And it goes kind of like this. And then you end up all over the place. And then you get there because there's like these walls and these bumps in the road and what people call failures. So can you tell me one of your failures that you had to hit along the way and how you were able to overcome it and apply it to your life and get to where you are now?
I have been at WPIX now, as I say, this is my 40th year, and it has been a roller coaster ride. I have been to the top, I dropped down, came back up. I never gave up. I joined in 1980, 1981. I was made anchor of a program called Midday Edition. It was a syndicated program. And then assignments change. Then I was off that program and I was anchoring the weekend news. Then I was doing the daily nightly news. Then I was off the anchor assignment. Yeah, it was a drop. It was a downside for me, at which point I said, maybe I should leave. I stayed with it. So it was a downer emotionally. But I was there. Larry King asked me on his program, why did I ever pursue a network? Why did I stay in New York? And the answer is, there's nothing. New York is so eclectic. So much happens in New York. New York is a microcosm of the world, really, when you look at it. And it's so exciting. And a network, as I was a reporter, I'm sitting in the bullpen and waiting for that story to come through. I enjoyed being out there. As I said earlier, I get an adrenaline rush every time I'm doing a story. And I was out there, and it's been a life experience for the stories I've covered in New York, the people I have met. I've watched how things have changed over the years. I've watched the highs, the lows. I've been there through the blackouts and through the riots, and I've been there through 9/11, probably the toughest story I ever covered because it wasn't off in a far-off distance. It was in my own backyard. I've had some disappointments. I had a disappointment. For 22 years, I was a contributing writer for Parade magazine, and I slipped up once and lost that gig. That was a disappointment because I failed to alert the editor in time that I had learned the subject of one of my stories had just been indicted. He learned about it before I did, but the story hadn't been planned yet. So, yeah, there have been some disappointments along the way. But the point was, I never gave up. And I'm not giving up because I still love what I do. And a year ago, I wrote a book. Let me show it to you. You see it? A reporter's intrepid journey. And it has been an intrepid journey. I've been encouraged for years by friends to write a book. So what I did, I selected 20 stories, I believe it was, of the more unique stories I've ever covered, and a dozen of the more memorable interviews. I put the whole book together, and it was a cathartic experience for me to let it out. And in a way, it was introspective because I found something in myself. You know what they say about reporters? We're cold, heartless people. Sometimes they say that when you got to cover some of these stories. I found that in a way it changed me because I covered so many tragedies and had to go to loved ones afterwards. And of course, I hate when I see an emotion picture where they portray a reporter going over to someone who just lost a loved one and they ask the question, how'd you feel when you learned that your son died? I hate that. I didn't quite go that route, but I had to go to loved ones often enough and ask difficult questions. But if we have the time, I'll share this one experience with you. There was a fire in Port Chester, New York, a nightclub. 22 people, if I recall correctly, were killed. I covered the story. It happened on a Saturday night. I covered the story on a Sunday morning. And I was out there looking for all kinds of angles I could get, being held back by police. And there was in the parking lot, I saw a woman just running around frantically. And I charged after her with my microphone, poking into her face. Why are you here? Stupid me. I should have known why she was there. And she was running, hysterical. Why are you here? Dumb me asking. And suddenly she stopped. She collapsed right in front of my camera, hysterical. What happened was she was there in the parking lot looking for her daughter's car. When she found her daughter's car was still in the lot, she knew at that very moment her daughter had to be among the dead. And here I was. I hated myself, Dennis. I hated myself. And I remember going back and editing the piece, and I said, please, get me out of that piece. I don't want to be seen asking her this. I think once I said, why are you here? And then when she collapsed, I kept that to a minimum. I did not milk the shot because I felt so guilty for the way I had handled it. And it taught me a lesson. Have a heart. You're a human being. Understand the grief that people are in. Common sense should have told me why she was there. And it really impacted me forever after. When I approach someone today and I reluctantly go up to a door, and there was a time someone drowned in a pool and I had to cover the story. And I said to my cameraman, I'm not going to the door. Then I watched my competitors going to the door. There were 3 other channels going. I said, I don't want my editor asking me why I didn't go, so I had to join them. But when I talk to someone who lost someone, I'll often first offer my condolences and say, I wish I weren't here as much as you wish I weren't here. And then I'll go on with the interview. I'll say, I'd like to do a tribute to your loved one. There's something you would like to say. I'm much more delicate in handling it. And sometimes these people want to talk. They find it cathartic. I had a man once, his son was shot in Harlem, and he recognized me from television. He called me over and he wanted to talk. And I was going to do it outside the funeral home. He said, no. He walked me inside and he wanted to talk beside his son's casket. So sometimes that does happen. But I've learned my lessons over the years. And so I wrote the book. I said it was cathartic, but also introspective because I found out, yeah, I do have a heart. And I'm a person first, and you got to remember that. You got to be sensitive in certain situations and not be heartless and go out there. A lot of lessons. It's all about an education. Just so I try to capture it in the book. I also wrote the book for a reason. I wanted my grandchildren to remember who Grandpa is, and when I dedicated it to them and to my beautiful wife, Lori, who she was my first line of defense. She would read my copy before it went to my editor, James. And people ask me how long it take to write it. Unbelievable. 6 months. How did I do it? I've kept notes on every major story I covered. So I went to the filing cabinet. I would dig out my old notes, some of them on yellowing pages. Someone wanted to know, how in the world do you remember the name of the driver in Phnom Penh, Cambodia? There he was on a yellowing page. So, yeah, that's how I did it in 6 months. I brought it all back, and I saved like headlines from newspapers and wire copy, plus my own stories. Plus I have video and audio tapes of. I have an audio tape that I did with Martin Luther King back in 1966. So yeah, I retained it. I keep telling my wife, we got to find a place, school somewhere to that would welcome to have these videos and audios and to give it to someone rather than see it all get dumped when I'm gone. No, there's a lot of history there.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, first of all, out of all of that,
As a matter of fact, can I put a plug in?
please do. Yeah.
I mean, it's a fascinating book, and I have to say so myself. As I saw it, A Reporter's Intrepid Journey. It's on Amazon, and it's on Kindle. And it's kind of a book you don't have to read straight through because you don't need pick a chapter you want. But my daughter has picked out some chapters that are good enough that she could read to the kids before they go to bed. Here's what Grandpa wrote. And so I get a kick out of it when the kids, they're 7 and 10. And I look forward to sharing some of these stories with them. But when they come over here and they see some of these pictures on my wall and they're learning about it in school, is that you and Martin Luther King? Is that you and Bill Clinton? and I'm delighted and I revel in telling you and sharing the stories with them.
Do you have a website or a way for people to find you there?
You can get me at Facebook, I guess WPIX. Just put in Marvin Scott.
Yeah.
I'm not the African American politician from Indiana. Yeah, he's the first one who pops up as a Marvin Scott. Incredible when I got online and found out how many Marvin Scotts there are in the world.
Well, everybody, I think you know by now, but we've been listening to Marvin Scott. Great conversation.
Thank you, Dennis.
I appreciate it, man. And thanks, everybody, for watching the Funky Brain podcast. Have a wonderful day today, and we'll talk to you soon. Hey, Dennis here. Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, I need to quit? Or maybe you've tried dozens or even hundreds of times on your own, but you can't do it. If you are sick and tired of being sick and tired, call me now for a free 20-minute consultation. We'll just talk for a little bit and we'll see if you don't feel better. And while we're all dealing with the COVID pandemic, I'm offering 2 free full 40-minute coaching sessions. We'll get you set up with the tools you need to become successful in recovery and sobriety. I know from experience, having been sober since April 8th of 2003, that it is not easy, but you don't have to do it by yourself. I'm here to help. We'll do it together. If I can get clean and sober, anybody can. So call me right now, not tomorrow when you're sick and hungover. Again, right now. I'm here to help. Have a great day.